Muy buenos días a todas y todos.
Good morning to everyone. On behalf of CAF and the Development Bank for Latin America, we welcome you to the conference, Public Policies and Cooperation for Gender Equality. This meeting is developed as part of the commemoration of the International Women's Day. Through this high-level conversation, CAF and ECLAC seek to create a space to exchange experiences, ideas, and proposals to respond to the challenges related to incorporate gender perspective in the design and implementation of public policies and regional cooperation. We greet our guests here present and also those that are following us online at www.caf.com. Remind you that you can join this conversation through our social media accounts at AgendaCAF on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn using the hashtag CAF in Chile. Now we invite to the stage Mr. Jose Manuel Salazar, the chair of ECLAC, to give the opening remarks. Good morning, dear Luis Pascal Vidal Udiqueo, Secretary of the Women and Gender Equality in Chile. My greetings, and to the government of Chile, hosting country, to commemorate International Women's Day. Sergio Díaz Granados, Executive President of CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, a warm welcome for you, and to all the team and board at CAF. My dear President Michelle Bachelet, without a doubt, you are a beacon in the region to promote women's rights, their autonomy, and gender equality. Your career as president twice in Chile, pro tempore president of the Pacific Alliance, the executive president for the United Nations Human Rights. It is an honor, President, to have you here with us as main speaker. Dear panelists, colleagues of the national system, it is an honor to open this conference on gender equality that is developed as part of the commemoration of the International Women's Day with the occasion of the meeting of CAF board, and as Chile as hosting country, it is a commitment for us to be here today because this commemoration calls on us to make an evaluation of the progress that has been made and pending issues in gender equality, and because it arrives at a very difficult time and challenging time for the region. It is a moment where we need urgently to provide solutions to revert structural issues that affect us and that have caused damage in areas such as education, health, energy, food security, the cost of living, finance, external debt, and other areas. This is compounded with the environmental crisis and the loss of biodiversity. It is a true crisis for development in the region. The cascade of shocks threaten to stop and even revert the progress that has been made in the areas of gender equality, to guarantee women's rights for teenagers and girls, to allow them to exercise their autonomy in the countries in the region. These are shocks that unfortunately deepen the structural issues in the region. These are manifested in a less participation of women in the labor market, higher incidence in poverty, and women between the ages of 20 and 50, and an unequal presence in decision-making process and the persistence of this pandemic and the shadows such as gender violence and the asymmetric access of women to access STEM careers. Allow me to share some data with you that illustrate the inequalities in gender. The pandemic implied a setback in women's financial benefits at home and the mass loss of employment. In 2021, the recovery of employment was unequal between men and women, and the gap in employment was not closed. 1 out of 2 women are still outside of the workforce, while in the case of men, the proportion is 1 out of 4. This gap in workforce participation has its counterpart in care that fall onto women. In the region, the progress in measurements and the use of time that we have evaluated at ICLAC have demonstrated that women dedicate 19% of their time to domestic work and care, while men just only 7.3. That is, they dedicate to these activities almost 3 times the time than men. 10 countries in Latin America have been able to value non-remunerated work at home, and 5 of them have developed satellite accounts for homework. This value is between 5% of GDP and 7% of GDP. In some cases, represent almost to a fourth part of the GDP, and 74% of that provision is provided by women. In matters of political participation, equality as a target is far from being met. The level of participation of women in the processes of decision-making in the public sphere are on average of around 30%, just as we will present today based on the data from the Observatory for Gender Equality. But if we put the focus on the mayorships, only 50% of mayorships in the region are occupied by women. This means that gender or parity democracy is far from being met. I take the opportunity to greet the mayors that are with us today and with whom we will be sharing time today, and a special greeting to our panelist, Carolina Leitao, President of the Association of Municipalities of Chile and Mayor of Peñalolén. Women have been able to make progress in education. However, these achievements hide other issues that are deepened as they advance through the educational system, where gender gaps become evident, as we mentioned before, in STEM careers. The connectivity and the access to technology is also unequal. It's estimated that 1 out of 4 women in the region are not connected or cannot cost or pay for connection to the internet. These data on gender gap are at the same time the challenges on which those that have decision-making power and influence on public policies must continue to work to be able to achieve substantial gender equality. And this sense, Latin America and the Caribbean have capacities, responses, and paths that will allow us to address these. We have in the region with a regional gender agenda, which is a roadmap, an innovative, progressive roadmap that is articulated with global commitments, and the 2030 agenda to unlock the 4 structural knots in gender equality: socioeconomic inequality, poverty, the sexual division of labor, the cultural patterns and patriarchal that are discriminatory, and the concentration of power. This agenda that will turn 45 and guides public policies in country to achieve gender equality in reality and in the law, and to guarantee women's rights. The regional agenda of gender aggregates the commitments made between the countries and nurtures itself from the capacity, the strength, and the creativity of women and women's movements, feminist movements in the region. It recognizes the rights of women in the equality as a key aspect of all actions of the state to strengthen democracy and to provide inclusive and sustainable development. All these capacities and policies and commitments become important in the scenario of the cascade crisis that the region is facing, and that demand solutions that are fast. And in this sense, the commitment of Buenos Aires approved in the 15th meeting for women that I had the opportunity to participate in November, and that gathered different participants and that integrates the regional gender agenda, that provides guidelines to develop a new style that puts at the center life and sustainability. In this sense, from ECLAG, we have been proposing the concept of the Society of Care as a bold response to the crisis of development. The Society of Care considers that care that sustain life are a key element for social functioning. It is conceived a society where the availability of time, resources, and services necessary to sustain life must be organized on the right to care and gender equality. And the Society of Care that is expressed articulates three principles around care for people and the planet. Ecodependency, that recognizes the human dependency towards nature. The interdependency, that recognizes the dependency between people and different areas such as economy, in the environment and culture. And the co-responsibility, that recognizes that the needs of care are intrinsical to humans, and they must be distributed between men and women, between homes, families, people, markets, states, and communities. Aligned with this concept, the commitment of Buenos Aires recognizes that care as a need, a work, and a right to people to take care, to be cared of, and to exercise self-care. We call to promote measures to overcome sexual division of labor and to transit towards a fair social organization of care as part of a new development style that drives gender equality in the dimensions of economy, environmental, and sustainable development. Esteemed colleagues, in these days and throughout the year, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of ECLAC. What better way to celebrate that reiterating our commitment to continue to work for a more productive future that is inclusive and sustainable for the region. Three of the main objectives that all of us wish, but we know that this will not be achieved without gender equality. An essential condition is the full participation of women in all their diversity in the decision-making policy in science and politics in all the areas of society. Another condition associated to this is a profound change in men to commit ourselves with co-responsibility of care, with democracy, with social dialogue that would allow this change. Because gender equality in politics is the responsibility of all political sectors and people. It's progress for all society. Throughout its 75 years of history, ECLAG has adequated its thinking to the realities of the region and the world. For this reason, we make a call to accelerate our pace towards a new style development that puts at the center life, the sustainability of life, a new style development that accelerates our pace to achieve gender equality and women autonomy. We know very well that national actions by themselves are not enough, that it's necessary also to have regional and international cooperation to correct the asymmetries. And from ECLAC, we also make a call to design and implement cooperation policies that allow to advance towards regional, global solutions to accelerate the path towards sustainability. And in this sense, we celebrate the alliance between the CAF and ECLAC that we will formalize this afternoon with the signing of an MOU for the Society of Care and Women's Rights. It is key to mobilize and to allocate additional resources. Esteemed colleagues, on the issue that calls on us today, we have defined the problem and also the solutions: more cooperation, more integration, more resources, more men and women committed to gender equality. For that reason, we invite you to think of this meeting as a good moment to have a conversation on cooperation policy that drives gender equality in different dimensions. The future that we dream of must be built together and starts today. Thank you.
Now we would like to invite Mr. Sergio Díaz Granados, Executive President of CAF. Dear Executive Secretary of the CEPAL, Mrs. President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, the Minister of Paraguay, Oscar Yamosis, Ministers and members of the Board of Directors of CAF, and a special greetings for Mrs. Renata Bargal for International Affairs and the Development of Planning in Brazil, Cristian Asilele, Vice President of CAF, Alejandro Claro, General Secretary of CAF, Michel Busquet, and Director of PNUD, Claudia Sangüesa, Secretary of Treasury in Chile, Mr. Luz Vidal, Gender Equality in Chile, and the Mayor of Peñarolén. Like José Manuel mentioned, we want to start this week for the first time in history with our Board of Directors of our Assembly of CAF in Chile, and it's a reason for pride and pleasure to be here in the house of the founders. It was President Eduardo Frei Montalvo and other leaders of the Andean region who started CAF 55 years ago, and we're happy that we start the activities here in an institution that's very loved by ICLAC. So, like we say, we will work with more coordination in these institutions, and we're very happy to start with this conference with the ex-president Michelle Bachelet, because we remember the long career that she's had, and I would like to add one title, if you let me. She's the godmother of CAF, because it made Chile come back to CAF, and during her government period, we made a lot of progress in infrastructure and financing to SMEs. So we're very happy that she can be in this conference because, of course, like José Manuel mentioned, gender equality is still one of the great challenges in Latin America, and we won't reach the development of the region if we have no activities around funding and persisting to improve the gender equality. And José Manuel also mentioned the impact of this disequality in the region. I would like to remind you that we still have a great challenge ahead of us, that Latin America and the Caribbean has the second highest rate of youth pregnancy, and that only a very small percentage of executives positions are covered by women. That we have to think that because there's very little water in Latin America, it's the women who drag the water. So we want equality in CAF, and that's very important. It's a pillar for CAF. And a year ago, we launched our strategy for gender equality, and we created for the first time a department for gender equality and women in CAF, not only to do operations that benefit women and people with discapacities, but to be transversal in all operations in CAF, whether it's technical cooperations, whether it's non-reversible investments, so that has to be present in all our projects. I would also like to read all the mayors that are here, the female mayors present here, that help us with their thoughts and their debate to continue and lighten the way to have more female mayors in the future. I would like to talk about an anecdote that highlights this commitment. 2021, when we had this meeting, we were in Panama with the entire team together. We were only men. and the only woman that was there by mistake, because a meeting was not for her. We were supposed to have a meeting afterwards with her. For some reason, it was only men, and if we have to take a picture, it had to be white and black. So it is a bit like a picture from 40 years ago and not from today. Today, fortunately, we have an executive vice president who's a woman, and in the board of directors, we also have Alejandro Claro, and there's a general secretary as well. But between 18 and 30% high positions in CAF are women, and it's a talent that has enabled us to broaden our vision and understand the difficulties and the challenges that we have in terms of development. The strategy of CAF has three main pillars: to obtain economic autonomy for women, more access to financial means and productive means, more physical autonomy, the fight against gender equality, against feminism and youth pregnancy, and more autonomy in decision-making, so more promotion of capacities, skills and competencies for leadership. We want to build a more equal region, and one of the vehicles to do this is our intention is to form a team of leading women in the region in different levels and at different orders, to strengthen competencies and skills of the workers for the high government and public departments. So that's in parallel with this conference. We have a sequence of conferences and a regional meeting of female mayors. Therefore, I would also like to thank the presence of Mrs. Luz Bacalavicuel, Secretary of the Ministry of Women in Chile, and who is with us today, so that her lessons can be used in CAF and help the region. So the system of care is something that we want to promote through CAF. With the current Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in Colombia, we talked about the absence of measurement of care in Latin America and Korea. Colombia started with measurements some years ago, but we still need strategy. We talked to her and with many leading women in the region. So we start with this strategy of care and establish policies to recognize the economy of care in our region. This challenge and other challenges, we hope to be hearing about those in the conference today, and that can help the Development Bank to do its work in terms of gender equality. Thank you very much for all the panel members to be here, and we hope that your messages help the rest of the team in CAF that's not only present here but also connected virtually in the entire region to celebrate this week of the International Women's Day with more commitments to obtain gender equality in the region. Thank you very much. We continue with the words from Luz Pascala Vidal, Subsecretary of Women and Gender Equality in Chile. First, as always, and as you know here in ECLAC, I would like to greet you in my mother tongue. Mari Mari Lamien, Mari Mari Kumpuche, Incheta, Los Vidal Boriqueo Piñen, Subsecretary of Women and Gender Equality of the Chilean government. I would like to greet Don José Manuel Salazar, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Mr. Sergio Díaz Granado, Executive President of CAF, Mrs. and very proudly I greet Mrs. Michelle Bachelet, ex-President of Chile, ex-President pro tempore of UNASUR and of the Pacific Alliance, Executive Director of Women in the United Nations for Human Rights. I would like to greet Ana Maria Viardi, Manager of Gender Equality and Inclusion of CAF, Ana Wesme, Director of Gender Affairs in ECLAC. Renata Vargas Amaral, Secretary of International Affairs and Development of Brazil. I greet my colleague Claudia Sanhuesa, Secretary of Economy in Chile, Subsecretary. I would like to greet Carolina Litao, President of the Association of Women and Female Mayors of Peñalolén. I would like to start today by greeting you and saying that it's an honor to be representing today the Chilean government and welcome CAF again, like we greeted each other today this morning. When I was born, and I was very little, Chile had just incorporated this program of governments that wanted to support each other in 1970. They just left that when technology was not possible like the possibility we have today. When presidents saw that the only way to make progress towards a diverse Latin America, but with a common direction, was to work together. Undoubtedly, international cooperation in Latin America has accompanied the development of our countries. The democratic progress, the improvements, look for improvements for the life of people, and progress in matters of gender equality aim at improving the conditions for women. The actions to support economic and social development of the countries through transfer of technology, knowledge, experiences, and funds also enable the integration of experiences of countries with a higher or the same level of development. In simple words, through international cooperation, we can share funds and experience between countries that are more or less advanced. The agencies that promote development, such as CAF, are very important actors in this field. That's why we're very happy that Chile is going back to the Development Bank of Latin America, because we share the desire to improve the lives of people, and especially the lives of women, girls, and adolescent girls. We are interested in the well-being of people in Latin America, the development of our countries, sustainability of their economies, and the care for their territories, and especially the advance of policies to achieve full incorporation of women in all fields. I would like to tell you that this is a speech that respects the protocol of ECLAC, but I want to go a bit beyond that. I would speak from my heart. When we feel that we're representing a state, when we work for equality, when we work for dignity, this can be reflected in concrete actions. Today, I represent the government of Chile, but I represent this desire to achieve equality and dignity for all its citizens. I'm a woman. I'm an indigenous woman. I'm a poor woman. I'm a woman from rural areas, from the countryside. These aspects that we have worked on hand in hand with ECLAC, with United Nations Women, there is honor of equality. I am a woman, I'm an indigenous woman, and I come from the countryside, where we also see lots of poverty. That is where we have to place all our efforts as governments in Latin America. We have to keep that common bond and have a pillar underlying that communicates between each other, where all international organizations can give their contribution. We cannot continue regretting poverty, regretting inequality, regretting losses of lives, especially for women and girls. We have to make a great effort as states to work together to be able to stop violence, economic violence, political violence, and also violence that we experience often from states when they don't apply public policies that work on all this inequality that women have experienced. We need budgets, we need more possibilities. And the strength and the alliance has to be made. That is why we really celebrate this incorporation of Chile in CAF. Each opportunity for the economic development for women is a possibility of autonomy, of freedom, of power to make decisions. If you want to be in politics, if we want to be in science or in business, these are all factors where today women are very little present, because to achieve credits, especially in also in banks, is very difficult for women. To study, there are not enough resources. To be an entrepreneur, we haven't got the same possibilities to have access to credits, to loans, to leave levels of violence. There are not budgets that enable us to have economy. That's why it is an honor today here to welcome, on behalf of the government of Chile, on behalf of our President Boric and the minister, to do this work together and to work for women and girls and adolescents of Chile. Welcome.
Now we will present the woman that has most represented us in decision-making spaces. She has been President of Chile. She has been the pro tempore president, executive director for UN Women. We have the honor to invite Ms. Michelle Bachelet for the main talk. Good morning to everyone. I'd like, of course, start by greeting Mr. José Manuel Salar, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Sergio Díaz Granals, the Executive Director of CAF, Mr. Oscar Yamusa, the Minister of Finance of Paraguay and President of the Board of CAF, to all the ministers and members of the Board of CAF, Ms. Renata Vargas Amaral, Ms. Carolina España, Executive Vice President of CAF, Cristian Asinelli, Vice President of Strategic Cooperation of CAF, to Ms. Michelle Mouchet, Undersecretary Adjunct Administrative for Latin America and the Caribbean, Ms. Claudia Sanhueza, Undersecretary of Finance of Chile, Luis Vidal, Undersecretary of Women and Gender Equality of Chile, to Ms. Carolina Leitao. I think she is the first women president of the Association of Municipalities, right? And also Mayor Peñalolén, and Ana Wemes, my former colleague of the Director of Women Affairs at ECLAC. And to all you friends, with joy I received this invitation to participate in this conference of CAF. And as we talked with the executive secretary during my governments, I tried to return. And today we're able to sign this. And I think that firstly, it is a joy because Chile has returned as a plenary member of CAF after 45 years and has also the honor to be the host country for the board. I'd like to also to greet the ministers to the mayors that are visiting us from 20 countries, and it's a pleasure to receive you in our country to drive new cooperation efforts, as mentioned before. Secondly, I'm very happy that gender equality has been placed at the center regarding issues for development. We see how the history, perseverance of social movements, of different women in different areas, of different activists, and able to demonstrate what is obvious, that women participation in equal conditions without exclusion is the only way to aspire to development. And the Undersecretary mentioned something. She mentioned that all the intersectionality that occurs in women issues. She mentioned that she was women, rural, and poor. In the pandemic, we saw who were affected the most. And this intersectionality and the difficulty that governments have to have sufficient data that allows them to reach those groups. Governments know the amount of women, the number of rural women, poor women maybe. Maybe they could also know the number of girls, but intersectionality to know where each one of those rural poor women are, that the data is not available. And therefore the capacity to have public policies that impact where they should impact is limited. And it is something that I think that got tired of listening to me when I was the High Commissioner, to have data so that our public policies are more adequate. I mentioned that without women participation, there is no possibility to have development. And as I always say, it's not also the right thing, but it's the smart thing to do for any society, to use that capacity, that 100% capacity of their citizens and all the contribution they can make. And the facts are eloquent. According to data from the OECD, higher women occupation means a higher development. More women working at the FMI, the IMF. I remember in Japan, they were calculating if they increased the amount of women in the economy, the possibilities to grow the economy in Japan would be infinitely higher than the situation that they had at that moment, where women study at the university, but then would stay at home and wouldn't work. So there is a series of studies that have demonstrated that more women, more growth, and at higher speeds. And the countries where girls and adolescents and women have more access to education, of course, potential is better used as a society. More value is created and cohesion is strengthened. Everyone feels part of that society. It is there where the environments that favor more diversity obtain more innovation. When I was at UN Women, we worked with different business people to see how to incorporate more women. But it's also true that many times women are included but have a difficulty in rising. Not only the glass ceiling that is mentioned. I read some studies, I can't remember what company, but an important business, where they tried to see how they could stimulate so that women could have more access and to start to rise up through businesses. And there had been a contest and people applied. They told this story, and a panel of people that were assessing them would say women had good performance, their interview was regular, conclusion, she's insecure. And the man that was applying, he had a good professional development, he has just a regular interview, they would say he has high potential. So these biases that are invisible, if I ask each one of you, if you have biases, you'll say, no, of course not. I'm in favor of gender equality, but however, biases exist. And I think that you always have to ask yourself, and I always comment this, it's embarrassing, but it happened to me. The first time that I took a plane, and the captain of the plane, this was a long time ago, so don't hate me. I said, I hope this woman knows how to fly a plane. Because prejudice exists always. I'm a bit older, so I've tried to remove all these prejudices. But I think that it's key that every time that we talk of gender equality, we have to ask ourselves, We have to examine ourselves beyond political correctness. In what way we can have biases that don't allow us to enable public policy so that women can have true equality. Of course, that it is said that, and it's demonstrated that when work environments are more diverse, there's better work environments and accelerates the adaptation to changing situations. In other words, countries that really want to have solid economies must invest in gender equality. It's not an option to do things as before. On the contrary, we'll continue to see losses of 27% of GDP. These are estimations that the IMF made that can be attributed to gender imbalances in the market. And it's also important to destroy exclusions and to equal access. As I mentioned before, we have to bring down areas that have glass ceilings or access barriers. You mentioned these areas, the STEM careers, which are areas that historically in the majority of countries still women have little access. We have to ask ourselves why. I don't know how much interest there is in there. We thought that maybe teachers could help to stimulate women so they could get into STEM careers. In the recent meeting, the Regional Conference on Latin America, the Caribbean, organized by ECLAC recently, you mentioned a commitment was signed to promote the participation of young women in the areas of mathematics, engineering, and sciences. There were very little astronauts also, women that were interested in going to space. And in this sense, UN Women is stressing so that this year, the basic issue is that women and young girls are subrepresented in the area of the creation and the use of technology. When I went to California as commissioner, and I can't remember at what big tech company, it was very interesting because the question say that robots could allow us to eliminate prejudices that we have today. But what has been demonstrated is that technology, 80%, I don't know, it was Apple, which business, 80% were men, not the people that work there, the people that generate platforms and technology. Of them, 4% were Latin American, but of those, only 2% generated ideas and knowledge, and 2% were Afro-American. By which you see the huge bias in a tech company, is one example, but almost all had the same type of representation of distribution, and therefore tech platforms many times do not have gender perspectives, and many times they have the biases from those that develop them. And that was seen in the case of a large company where they started to use technology such as AI for recruitment. And they realized that those recruitment systems had biases against women and Afro-Americans. So I mentioned this because technology, everyone says this is great, but in each one of them you have to include gender perspective to make sure they do not have the biases that could be included in them and that we do not realize. What is relevant is that gender equality is a dynamic dimension, such as the changes in our lives in engineering and technology have opened, without a doubt, huge opportunities and benefits, but societies continue to replicate these biases against women. During the last decade, we have lost $1 billion in GDP in countries of medium and low income countries due to the exclusion of women in the digital area. Even more so, the digital spheres can become a new space of risk and harassment for young women. So not only it perpetuates exclusion and inequality, but also can be a source of gender violence. For that reason, that we think of the future and present that the UN proposes 4 paths. 1 is to close all the gaps in terms of access and digital skills. 2, to support women and young women in the areas of STEM, to create technology that satisfies the needs of women and young women, and 4, to end gender violence enabled by technology. And we see here an example that I consider key, which is gender equality is not an issue of a specific public policy. It's an urgent matter that as a country we should examine constantly because it affects millions of lives. Here, a key aspect intervenes. Who incorporates these reflections in our daily lives? Whether in rules, laws, or public policies. Said otherwise, we arrive to the question of how decisions are made and what power do we give women in these decision-making processes. And quite candidly, if we just give crumbles of power to women, we are destined and condemned to repeat the past and to put a limit to our development. Although advances are undeniable, there's still a long way to go. September last year, there were 28 countries with women that were chief of state. And if we take this data to the speed of changes, it will take 130 years to reach gender equality. In the economy, we are 230 years away to reach gender equality in the economy. In Parliament, women occupied only 26.6 of seats in the world, and only 5 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have reached or overcome 40% of representation of women in politics. At this current pace of progress, gender equality will not be reached until 2062. Local governments, how are they? Much worse. ECLAC data said 15% of women mayors. But well, globally, it seems to be at 34%. For that reason, I celebrate that CAF is organizing this first regional meeting for women mayors, because in local politics, there is huge space to revalue politics on the one hand and to evidence the role that women play in politics. Every step in gender equality is necessary, but we have to speed up our pace. The distance away is still far. And I love to hear cooperation and financing, because one of the problems that exists today is that there are achievements, there's a Ministry of Women, but resources and budget is low. So we're required to make this and to take this seriously is try to increase budgets and also in development programs. I think that the speed of change is still too slow. And for that reason, it's important to understand that this cannot be only an issue of concern for women. It's a task that men must take on their own if we want to create the change in speed. Nobody can be just a simple spectator. And it's not a favor. It is not a favor for women. It is not a demonstration of goodwill. It's a smart decision to have a development of society. It has been mentioned before, salary gaps, care, eradicating violence, but there's another issue that hasn't been mentioned and that I believe that in region is very difficult, and that is the high percentages of informal work. In some countries, even up to 70% of informal work, and of those, the largest proportion are in women. And the pandemic countries that generated support policies, subsidies, social protection policies, those women in informal work do not have access. They do not exist. They're not enrolled. So when we talk of equality of rights and gender equality, we have to think in the specific characteristics that labor has in our society and the way that cities are organized as well, to realize that none of this can depend on only on leaderships and feminist activists. Everyone has to participate. Friends, in this point of history of our countries, we must have the wisdom to understand deeply on what does our coexistence depend on, to include all talent and perspectives. As my ex-chief, the General Secretary of the UN, when he wrote that, we all built it, but he wrote that excellent document, which is our common agenda. It's an excellent document. I suggest you to read it because it talks of the future, but also of the present in a very clear and important way, given that as the world is today, one expects that we can continue to make progress adequately. I believe that development is not a target that we reach at, it's a permanent work to have full coexistence. But I see with concern that the question marks on the development in our region have been left aside. And there are reasons for this. On the one hand, the pandemic tensioned our societies. We experienced a crisis whose extension we did not expect, considering the advances that we had in health. On the other hand, I think that the largest crisis that planet has is the triple environmental crisis, where we combine biodiversity, the risk at biodiversity, pollution, and climate change. We tend to only talk of climate change, but the triple crisis is comprehensive and complete. And we must see it quite seriously, because we see the destruction that sometimes we see incapable of stopping. And both phenomena are very connected. Both have an origin in the way that humanity has populated the planet. Both have global effects that test our institutions and our capacity to react. Even more so, the war in Ukraine has brought back the worst concerns on the power to hurt other humans. And the idea of survival stalks are present. I'm not saying all this to depress you all, but just to show you how difficult the world is today. And when facing this, we still have to insist on the importance of gender equality.
So it's easy to understand with this panorama that I've just mentioned that questions about development have are not helping the efforts to get back, which it can't be understood that this crisis is originating questions about what is essential, about what we have to protect. When the pandemic arrived, we were in a multilateral crisis, an attempt of certain countries to try and affect multilateralism. And maybe I will die dreaming of things that have to happen and that will have to function, that have to work, and to think that the pandemic, which puts the risk of so many people at risk, generates the same thing that was generated when the capacity of the states after the two world wars said we have to aspire for a better world. And then, of course, that led to the Declaration of Human Rights. So, to make sure that people don't have to live through the horrors anymore. That in the pandemic, I thought that the pandemic would generate that. I was wrong. Unfortunately, it didn't have that effect. But I want to remain optimistic and not lose hope. I always cite this Motutu, who unfortunately died, who said that hope is always there. You have to be a prisoner of hope. Otherwise, you should just switch off the lights and leave if you lose hope. And, the mayor is nodding and just saying that I imagine that Carolina often goes through situations like this. So I would like to say that we are in a frustrating period for collective decision-making because we're caught in a present that is uncertain. So the debate in situations of fake news, of disinformation, and in this context, how do we find a balance to offer clarity about the routes to choose? It's not easy, but we have to get efforts together to consolidate and consolidate what is effective and that represents the best of our past. We have to defend peace and democracy, undoubtedly. What we thought was something that we had achieved in the 20th century makes us uncertain, and we have to react. So the new challenge of development is health in democracy. Without democracy, gender equality is not possible. There will be no space to take care of relationships between people. And if we go back in liberty and freedom and in rights that took decades to achieve. So we have hope for development, and we have to anticipate the effect of the balance that we need to have tools to repair the future. We can create conditions to take less time to find solutions to crisis, to repair negative impact, to work on accumulating knowledge and have mechanisms for improvement, institutions, demand informed public debate, but we can't achieve this if not all women participate, men and women. Development is a matter for everybody, for the present and for the future. To finalize, I would like to indicate that it's very good to refresh our view on the challenges. The repetition of recipes can't guide our decisions. We have to renovate our possibilities of improvement that should be just, sustainable and human to achieve this agreement that enables legitimacy, full democracy. To renew our hope and possibilities, we have to highlight that it is in our hands to build a better development, a better present, and a better future for all, for men and women. Thank you very much, and I hope that this will be an excellent occasion and that wonderful ideas come from here, and you can always count on me. Thank you. We would like to thank the contribution of ex-president Ms. Bachelet, who, because she has a busy agenda, has to leave now. We would like to continue now with the panel of equality policies and equality in politics. We will have some introduction words now. Good morning. It's a great honor for me to participate in this space in such a special week. It's an honor and a challenge to, in 5 minutes, to speak, and then after ex-president Michelle Bachelet. I have very little time. I will not greet everybody. You know that it's an honor for me to greet all of you. In 2 days from now, we will commemorate again the International Women's Day. It's a date that makes us think of the road that we have run and the road that we still have to run to achieve that gender equality so aspired. This challenge is to have substantial equality for women, and we have to take concrete actions now and at all levels. Undoubtedly, there have been important progresses for participation of women. We can't deny that. A century ago, in most countries, women had no right to vote. Today, that's not questioned. So these obstacles that limit women to participate fully and in equality in the public and private life is still present. There are still stereotypes and gender roles that let women constantly work at home and do work that's not recognized and not remunerated, and the bias for women in public positions. There are, in 22 countries, have a woman president. There are still 190 countries that have never had a woman as a president. In parliaments, only 26% are women. 26% is not a bad number, but 26% is not equal in our countries either. We have that percentage in the region because there are countries where there are 40% of participation in parliament, and there are other countries where the number is not even 15%. So that number is not equal in our region either. At this rhythm of growth, this pace of growth, we will need 130 years to achieve inclusive governance. None of us will experience that. And however, these 130 years are not guaranteed because there's always the danger of going back. That's a threat always present. We participate very little in dynamic departments of the economy and very little in high positions in companies. This situation is repeated in other spaces of decision-making, such as the academic area and trade unions. We really have to adopt public policies for the new management models with equality of gender equality. Today we have very important protagonist women here for change, and I'm very happy that we can get to know you, that we can support each other among women. With one exception, gender equality is not an affair only for women. It's an issue that is the responsibility of all of us, because what we're really talking about is of the equality of rights and opportunities, basically human rights. And here, one of the three powers of the state are very important, including ministry portfolios and especially the ministries of economy that play an important role. And we've already mentioned why. We need to have the budget necessary for policies of equality to finance programs against gender violence, the real pandemic for women in our region, policies of sexual and reproduction, policies for generation of income that enable production of the entrepreneurs and companies led by women, and their equal participation in the most dynamic sectors of the economy. We really need, like that has been mentioned before in all speeches, policies of care that take into consideration those that need the care and those who give care, and guarantee access to services, time and resources to care and to be taken care of. Public policies of equality are not optional. It's not optional either to have representation and participation of women. It's a necessity. It's an obligation, a moral obligation, and a question of basic human rights. It's a broad cultural change that takes time and that can't take place without us, without equal representation, without effective participation in decision making in public and private sector. And when women get to decision making powers, we have a double or dual work. All women present here, not only because we are over-demanded in our positions, but also because we have to represent the interests of women. Those interests that have been absent on the public agenda historically. Today, we have to get together women, diverse women with power in different levels, so we can all together think of strategies and political tools that can enable us to make progress as a collective. I would like to invite you to run this long path, which is concrete, so we together think of gender equality that's real and substantive, and that this date, close to March 8th, will be an opportunity again to collaborate and to talk about the debate of gender equality, and that we can renew our commitment and open new roads to achieve the goal that states and agencies together here have proposed ourselves for 2030, to achieve gender equality and empower women and girls so that nobody stays behind. Thank you very much. Now we would like to invite Anna Westmes to the stage, Director of the Division of Gender Issues for ECLAC, as the moderator of the panel. We would like to invite Mrs. Renata Vargas Amaral, Undersecretary of International Affairs in Brazil and Development in Brazil. Mrs. Claudia Sanhueza, Undersecretary of Economy in Chile. Mrs. Luz Pascal Avigal, Undersecretary of Women and Gender Equality in Chile. Mrs. Michelle Mouchet, Undersecretary of PNUD. And Mrs. Carolina Leitao, President of the Association of Municipalities and Mayor of Peñarolén. Welcome to all of you. Well, good morning to all of you. Sienna Wismas. I'm the Director of Gender Issues of ECLAC, and it's a pleasure on behalf of ECLAC and CAF to moderate the panel on equality policies and equality in politics. The participation of women, transversalization of gender perspective in public policies and regional cooperation is essential. It's essential for sustainable development, but also for peaceful and inclusive societies and guarantee of human rights. The data that we have talked about this morning show us that representation of women is insufficient at all levels of decision-making in the world, and that we still have a path to run so that really the region has what the region has conquered becomes what really is important. Equality of results and substantial equality for all women and girls without leaving anybody behind. It's correct, like President Michelle Bachelet said, it's smart, and we also have to work with a sense of more urgency, and that's what we will talk about here in this panel. I would like to tell you that March 8th, the International Women's Day, is also a moment to recognize, to acknowledge the legacy of women, of communities, of collectives that have opened doors and women and windows so that many can be here. We have, of course, acknowledged the ex-president of Chile, Mrs. Michelle Bachelet. Today I have with me in the panel Renata Vargas Amaras, Secretary of International Affairs and Development of Brazil, Claudia Yamil Sambuesa Riveros, Undersecretary of Treasury, Luz Pascal Vidal, Subsecretary of Women and Gender Equality in Chile, Michel Mouche, Undersecretary and Administrator of the Directory of the Office for Latin America and the Caribbean of the UNDP with her first visit, and we're very happy that she is here. Carolina Leitao, President of the Association of Municipalities and Mayor of Peñalolén. In the auditorium, we also have Maria Jose Torres, Coordinator and Resident of the System of United Nations in Chile, Alejandra Claros, General Secretary of CAF, and the female mayors that are here. I would like to recognize the talent, the capacity, the creativity of women in Latin America and the Caribbean who have opened doors for who it's still very difficult to get to power and to maintain in power. That's why this meeting and this conversation is very important. This region has many things that we can be proud of. Our region hosted the first conference of women in Mexico in '85 and the first regional in La Habana in '77. But a lot before, in 1945, the diplomatic delegates, women of this region, especially Berta Lud from Brazil and Bernarda Bernardino from the Dominican Republic, who reached inclusion of the sentence equality of rights between men and women in the main charter that was the foundation of the United Nations, dignity and value of human beings, which is in the introduction of our Charter of the United Nations, when the majority of countries, in majority of countries, women couldn't even vote. We really, since then, have made progress, and this is a region that, like the executive secretary of ECLAC already said, has agenda of gender equality. Is one of the regions in the world where in the last 45 years, governments, but also the mechanisms of women, the association of civil society, the movement of women and feminist academicians have got together in this multilateral space with an ambitious agenda, progressive agenda and full, complete agenda. Camila Boyane and me and the colleagues of CAF have said that it's very good that the program of CAF is structuring around these three autonomies that are so desired and that emerge in the work in the region. So we will talk now to share experiences, ideas, and proposals. What are these solutions, the daring solutions, like José Manuel Salazar said, our executive director, that have to be structural, but like the Luis Miral said, we need the results immediately, because there are too many girls, too many women that are staying behind. Each panel member will have a first round of 5 minutes of intervention to share experiences, and then they will have one last intervention of 1 minute to give us a message. We're concerned, but we are working and we're doing things. Like Michelle Bachelet said, we need to renew hope with commitments and also from joy that has always characterized women that have been saying for 110 years, bread and peace for the world. So now I would like to start with our guest, Renata Vargas Amaral, Secretary of International Affairs and Development in Brazil. I will be very brief. Of course, they have an incredible career and capacity and experience, but Renata is a lawyer in international experience with a long career as an advisor of the government and investors in international trade, and working in negotiations of multilateral and bilateral negotiations in the International Trade Organization. Renata, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I must confess that I'm much more relaxed that the president is not here. I wouldn't be able to behave as a secretary, but rather as a fan. I apologize for my Spanish, but I'm happy to be here in Chile because Chile has gender public policies that I love for a long time now in international trade and also internal public policies, and I think it's a model for the region. I'm very happy also to represent Brazil with President Lula and Minister Simone Tebet, because the minister is a feminist, and myself as well. I've created a group of women in 12 countries today for international trade, and I'm part of the hub of the OMC, the Global Trade Commission for Gender, and I'm happy to be with this panel with you. You are all examples and role models for the region. In Brazil, we are building a new gender agenda, a concrete and true one. March 1st, last week, the First Lady gathered the 11 women ministers of the government and the presidents of the public banks to talk of the agenda, the gender agenda for the next 4 years. And especially, they have put forward a bill that establishes sanctions for companies that do not provide salary equality. This is something new in Brazil. This will be published today, March 8th, or this next March 8th. The Simone Tebet has been the first women mayor in her city, the first women president of Congress of Brazil. I am the first Secretary of International Affairs and Development of the Ministry of Planification and Budget in Brazil. As a woman, in our ministry, we are working towards gender equality in all positions, especially in leadership roles. So we have a women's secretary, we have women directors and men directors. We are trying to work very strongly towards gender parity and to bring people and to bring black people. And we have women in our teams to incentivize affirmative policies not only for women, but black women who are many times are at the base of our society. And I was listening very carefully to you because I like this discussion to have more women leaders. But we must also consider women that cannot be leaders now, that are poor, that are marginalized in society. And I loved, for that reason, listening to you, because that is something that is very present in us at the Ministry of Planning and Budget, and also horizontally and across the board throughout the Brazilian government. At our ministry, we are working with a budget-sensitive towards gender. We have a pluriannual budget. This year we are organizing and concluding that term of the previous administration, and we have our budget for 2024 and to 2027. By 2024, we'll have a pluriannual budget focused on women. So we have the pluriannual budget for the whole country, but one sensitive to gender, focused on gender, with KPIs, with budget for gender and women. So we are working very closely on that, and at the Ministry of Planning, I have myself and the Secretary for Planning working on gender, and with the Ministry we're very happy to be able to implement our ideas and to try to make reality these improvements in Brazil during the next 4 years. We at the Secretariat of International Affairs and Development, we are also working, and CAF knows this very well, the Commission of External Financing for Brazil. We are working towards training of women mayors, women governors, and project leaders that receive external funding from banks such as CAF. So we are working on this for this year, 2023, and for the future years as well. And to conclude, I think that I'd like to also to indicate the free trade agreement that Brazil has with Chile, that is very modern in terms of gender. You have many chapters, at least 8 chapters in gender in your free trade agreements, and I am very happy to be here to discuss further this. Thank you for your participation to Renata Vargas Amaral, Secretary of International Affairs and Development of Brazil, for all these proposals, concrete proposals of having a gender-sensitive budget focused on gender, public policies, trade policies. And our next guest is Claudia Sangüesa. She's a doctor, PhD in economy. She is Under Secretary of Finance of Chile, and before she has had a huge experience and career as the Director of Economy and Social Policies, investigator of the Center for Conflict and Social Cohesion. She has worked in different expert panels, such as CASN and presidential commissions, and also was a member of the Foundation for Overcoming Poverty and the Investigation Lab for Educational Innovation in Latin American and Caribbean. Much of social affairs goes through fiscal policies and the economy, and we know that they are large challenges that you are addressing. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here in this panel. Also, the prior work has implied always to think of designing public policies that make a change in situations that are unjust and gender gaps are also part of those inequalities. And this government in particular, the government of President Boric, part of his government program has 4 pillars, and one of the pillars is is to establish a feminist perspective across the board throughout all public policies. And fiscal policies is also included. So it has been in part our duty, simply put, to consider fiscal policies and the reforms that we are pushing forward from our ministry to include a feminist perspective as well. In addition, and part of the context of this is the crises, the different crises that we are undergoing. We arrived at a moment at this government, at a moment of post-crisis after the pandemic that implicated challenges in terms of gender gaps as well. From one day to the next, the public space was reduced, limited, and we went to the private sphere. Schools were closed, nursery were closed, and that changed the way in which we worked inside our homes, and how then we could reallocate tasks that were invisible that also gave us the opportunity to create visibility on them. But we also had a period of economic adjustment last year, which was challenging with high inflation that usually affects the more underserved homes. And we were also leaving or concluding a social crisis. And these were the challenges, and to see how we could increase women labor participation and to recognize these care tasks that were invisible, to reclaim public space, and also the ecological and climate crises that is also a part of one of the main pillars of this government. Very recently, Chile had a crisis with wildfires. Wildfires that in part are the result of this climate crisis. We are undergoing a mega drought, and this has left thousands of homes damaged and destroyed, and the loss of biodiversity. And many of these homes that were damaged are also led by women. Now, within the policies that we are driving and pushing forward, and knowing that it's our responsibility to think of fiscal policies with a feminist perspective, there are three structural aspects and one circumstantial aspect, I'd say, that we are pushing forward. On the one hand, the tax reform, we have a gap with other OECD countries regarding taxes for a long time now. And this implicates that we have fiscal spending that is lower than what we should have. And that fiscal spending in social policies includes education, pensions, health, and also care, a national care system. And what we have established is to have a tax reform to be able to face these expenses and spending, which are aimed at closing gender gaps. And the first thing that we thought when we arrived at the government is, how do we give a feminist perspective to this tax reform? We did two things which are important that we thought that were small but have been very significant. Firstly, never before the tax burden had been studied. The gender gaps vis-a-vis tax burden had never been studied. And we investigated it. And when women are overrepresented as 60% of the poorest homes, or 60% of the 50% of the most poor, 1%, and the top of income distribution, they are only 20%. So the progressive nature of tax reform also closes gender gaps. the progressive nature of a tax system closes gender gaps in terms of tax collection. And that was a quantitative numerical argument on why the tax system had to be more progressive by applying taxes to income and equity, and also to reduce. And why? Because usually tax systems discount the expenses necessary to produce income, and the expenses in care is necessary to be able to produce income. So we had analysis of the pension reform that we are also involved in, where we included the incorporation of a mixed system for the Chilean pension system with social security that has, among other goals, to reduce gender gaps and to incorporate a gender perspective in the system, to recognize the cost of maternity, to recognize care that have been made invisible both for men and women, and to have unisex calculations to calculate pensions that does not incur in individual capitalization. And finally, we are also incorporating a budget with a gender perspective to identify public policies that close gender gaps. And with this tax revenue, one of the proposals is to create a national care system. And finally, in this budget for 2023, we have 3 goals: economic security, food security, and citizen security. To provide more certainty in a world of high uncertainty as today is also a feminist perspective in life. Thank you. Thank you, Claudio Sangüesa, Undersecretary of Finance for Chile, for reminding us that progressive tax policies is key to close gaps, and also very connected to ECLAC is to develop clearer ways to be able to measure these gaps and differences. And of course, it incentivizes us to continue to work with Chile and to follow Chile regarding its national care system and what Chile is proposing today very seriously. And in this sense, we will have now an intervention from Luz Pascuala Vidal Wiriqueo. She is Mapuche, a woman that has had a long history of social leadership, first at her community, at Padre Las Casas, and then finally at a national level leading the union of home worker unions, and also a very strong campaign that we've taken as a role model region, which is to take care of those that took care of you. That has to do with this idea of a care system to take care of people, the planet, but also to dignify, to provide dignity and to have decent work for all the sector of care that is performed in its majority by women. You are a source of inspiration for many women leaders, men and women that we are looking for or working towards equality today. Undersecretary, the floor is yours. Thank you, Anna. Well, to talk of public policies that invite us to advance towards equality, and also equality in policies. As a Mapuche woman, as a former house worker, and working on social activities, that knows the reality of life and how difficult it is for women to participate. I repeat again, today it is an honor to be here today to accompany President Gabriel Boric to the Minister of Antonio Oriana to implement public policies that can have that perspective, a territorial perspective, this reality perspective that many times is hard to make visible because, as someone said here in Chile when the pandemic started, we didn't know that so much poverty existed. Phrases like this many times make the difference that can be had, that could exist when you have the actual experience of public policies that are needed. What we can do today to accompany the president with territorial perspective, with real perspective, to advance towards gender equality, to advance toward policy equality of women participation is not an easy task. When we had, or these long years ago, we had very minimum rights with voting rights. We were able to have rights, but if we continue to be left aside of the decision-making process, situations will not improve significantly. Even more so, if we leave people that can have this decision that is necessary so that public policies can become real, so they can become real and reflect the needs. That's why we're interested today in the issues of power, equality in politics. The lives of women will not continue or will not change if we do not have equal access such as men. Just to give you a couple of numbers. The last parliamentary elections, women had 35.4% of available seats at the Chamber of Deputies and 24% in the Senate. Today, to be able to have that will be worked on gender violence, for example, wouldn't be possible if women were not present and men, because of course they have to deconstruct themselves from a reality that they've had. It wouldn't be, those policies wouldn't be possible if you didn't have that perspective, which is required to be able to have the sensibility that other women have. At a municipal level, and from the 2021 elections, 17% of mayorships are occupied by women. And here we have our first mayor that is representing all municipalities in Chile for the first time, a woman, or this role is occupied by a woman. In addition, almost all the regions in Chile reached at least one mayorship, with the exception of two regions, which are the regions of Ñuble and Aysén, further to the south of Chile, where inequality is very entrenched regarding the options to access roles of leadership. Regarding council members, those that accompany mayors, which are the first step or the first entry of government, of the people that were elected, 751 were corresponded to women and 1,501 to men. These represents a 33.3% women participation at this level. Why do we ask equality or parity? Why do we ask for participation? Gender parity in leadership roles has important history in Chile. The first government of Michelle Bachelet, with the first with its cabinet, had 10 men ministers and 10 women ministers. The recent law also enforces that political parties must present equal amount of women candidates to men. This allowed Chile to go to ranking position number 41 in terms of gender parity. That reflects changes, important changes, when action are made so that women can participate in politics. Just an additional data point. The current government of Representative Gabriel Boric gave the most important signal of gender parity by naming a cabinet with 14 women ministers and 10 men ministers. Today we are 13 and 11 men, but we hope that with actions, women will be able to participate more in public policies because they provide other perspectives, they provide other realities, and that today, if governments do not participate and do not incorporate more women, they are losing the half or 50% of their human capital.
Thank you very much, Luz Vidal, Undersecretary of Women and Gender Equality in Chile, and it's also the very first time that this ministry is part of this executive committee, which also places the equality policy at the center. We've been saying already this day that it's not just equality policy, it's also equality in politics and more centrality. Michel Mouchet, Undersecretary of the United Nations, Adjunct Administrator, and for UNDP, specialist in social politics and social development with a multi-social perspective in leadership. In her country, she was a minister and vice minister of social development, and she presided the National Consultation for Development to enhance social dialogue and national priorities around sustainable agenda. Welcome on behalf of CAS and ECLAC, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Anna. I would like to thank CAS and CEPAL to invite me in this panel. It's an honor for me to share with leader women in the region who have assumed the challenge to come in this public area. I was a public servant in my country and now international. I understand the challenges that this decision implies, but I also understand firsthand the great number of possibilities that are opened when women decide to occupy positions that can make decisions in the public space, and that really worth because of all the interventions we've been seeing this today. I would like to indicate also that it's a happy coincidence, if you can call it like this, the fact that now the president and said in his intervention that is historically male by definition because of the sector, and it coincides with the inauguration of the International Week for Women, and it also coincides with the inauguration of the number 76 legal commission that is being held at this moment in New York, which is the largest world organization of decision-making in public policies for equality, inclusion and women empowerment. So we have three situations that are held on one single day and that show, like Jose Manuel said and the president of CAF said, when decision makers are clear on the importance of understanding intersectionality and that gender equality has in all the things happen like in this space as part of the directory of CAF. And I think it has it's clear also especially from the master speech of ex-President Michelle Bachelet, it's not possible to talk about development if this development is not sustainable, and that there is no sustainable development if there is no gender equality. And though development is a dynamic concept, and we are in a situation where we still have lots to do to achieve this gender equality through systemic interventions, and all the numbers that we have heard this morning made clear that if we don't take large steps, we won't get there on time, get there to that equality. It's also clear that we are at a period of time where we have to happy that it has been globally recognized that gender equality has to be at the center of the agenda for development. We talk about speed, it's urgent, and it depends on our capacity to deal with a systemic strategy. And the public policies, of course, which is very important that we're talking about today, are a powerful tool for this due diligence and to accelerate this development in society, which we hope that can help us to convey decisions of priority to our governments and that enable us to convert social dynamics, we've referred to the pandemic already, as a moment of lots of difficulty, great difficulty, where everybody could feel how quick public decisions of public policy can affect our behavior. So we should learn from this, as well as our capacity to innovate and accelerate our answers and responses to be able to deal with gender equality. And it's clear that inequalities in gender are complex, and that there are no public policies, linear public policies, through which we can deal with them, but they demand multidimensional policies to capture precisely that intersectionality, and that can put gender across everything we do, which is what we try today to do in the program of the United Nations for Development, with this broad mandate in terms of development that can enable us to make this intersectionality transversal in gender issues, in priorities for governments, but also with knowledge in the field, like Luz Pascala said. Really, it's not just the design of a policy or the capacity to have integral generate public policies, but to connect them to reality, because in some way the decision makers, whether we're women or men, have the capacity to understand the reality. If we can understand it better, who can understand this better than those who live through this every day? So we will give examples of things that are not usually related to gender equality. For example, the climate promise, 100% of the contributions determined at international level consider gender effective democratic governability. We have to highlight the effort of the Chilean office, how this new constitution that we support in its process has to guarantee full participation of women in this process. Sustainable and inclusive economies, so inclusion of women in the labor market, and we have to support construction of systems of social support, inclusive and universal, hand in hand with care systems that we have been referring to already. Poverty has the face of women, so that's why we have been working hand in hand with the University of Oxford in the development of a multi-dimensional measure of poverty based on gender that will be launched soon, and that can give new ideas of how we can treat the challenge of inclusion also from other perspectives. And of course, we have to involve other sectors in the society in this process. The private sector has already included this gender equality, and especially and also in Chile in the academic sector and the Senate, and this can be managed through solid alliances, like we've seen in UNDP, in other areas for women, like ICLAC, OMC, and other organizations in our region, such as CAF. This is the end of my first intervention. Thank you very much, Michel Mouched, Under Secretary General and adjunct administrator of the Office for Latin America and UNDP. And to finalize, but of course not least important, is decision making and in the social space. It's a pleasure for me to present Karina Letao, who is the president of the municipalities. She is here for the first time, and she's also the mayor of Peñalolén. She is a lawyer of the Christian Democrats, and I would like to highlight from her career that she has won 4 elections. Not only at local power is difficult, but also studies show that careers are shorter and shorter. Locally, she has a commitment with renewable energy and to build with participation a safer and more convivial community. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel and to try to contribute in this debate or this way of trying to make progress in gender equality. And I would like to concentrate, well, I would like to give my opinion on many things, but I would like to concentrate on what it means for us who work in the local area to be able to reduce the gaps of gender equality locally. I, as a president and the first women president, the Association of Municipalities in Chile that has 380 municipalities, so 320 of the 340 Association of Municipalities, the largest one in the country. It's very transversal from political perspective and also represents the reality, geographical reality of our country, represents all the regions. This year, this association is 30 years old, and last year I was the first female president of the association, and could say, well, what is the brand? What do you want to the print? What do you want to push in local policies to give it a different print for this municipal period? And one of the things that I think we have to try to deal with and make progress in is that we know we have to give more space so women can participate not only in politics but in different decision-making spaces in companies and other areas. However, when we make this statement to open space for participation, that's not enough just to open these spaces, but we also have to guarantee access of women to these spaces, because very often these spaces are opened, but we have no women that are ready, I won't say prepared, because many women are prepared, but many women who are ready to get to these positions of decision-making and power. And why does this happen? Because the gender gaps that are often related, we see in many areas, in poverty area and economic, also in the political area, these inequalities are reproduced. So it's very difficult for women to get to these spaces. There are situations that have to do with care, for example, and the roles that have been established culturally for women. So the guilt that many women feel when we have positions of power, that has to do with the redistribution of parental distributions in the role of care. There's a 7th element that's very important, which is economic field. Many women don't have economic independence that they need to be able to develop and impulse a political career, which means, for example, expenses on election campaigns. Very often they have not got the opportunity to request a loan or to obtain the resources to push through a political career. The policies that pushed through by the parties, we know that there are many women here that need an economic encouragement to get to this responsibility positions, and many gaps related to training and strengthening to be able to reach positions of power and to have access to training, education in these fields. So what are we doing, and what is my main challenge as a president of the Chilean Association for Municipalities? It is to be able to have an influence in different areas locally, to be able to strengthen this transversalization of gender focus in local management. And when we talk about these gaps in locally, these gaps are repeated because a country is a country that has lots of inequality from territorial perspective. So when we talk about the municipalities, what we're doing now is a national survey in all the municipalities on gender, who have developed policies to transversalize gender equality in the policies. We find that many say, first of all, they have no policies of gender. Some even haven't got gender offices in their municipalities. Second, they have no training to develop these initiatives. So what do they consist of, especially in the mayors who don't know about this? We could see, okay, we've made lots of progress, but there is lots of lack of knowledge about what it means to transversalize this gender focus in local management. And also we need training. And of course, when we ask why are there no trainings, most of the time the main gap has to do with funding. To have trained people, to have initiatives that can be financed. And in that sense, our main task as an association is to be able to generate policies and programs that can break these gaps. How we in this association can generate skills in these municipalities to generate initiatives and to be able to transversalize this gender focus in local management. Some time ago, a group of recently elected female mayors developed a decalogue that we gave to Minister Orellana, where we established certain ideas and principles that could say, okay, well, here, under these principles, we believe that the municipality can decide, because one thing, of course, is to state that we have a commitment with gender transversalization, but the other thing is what are the policies and practical programs that a municipality needs to be able to say that they are a feminist municipality. And in that sense, we brought her this decalogue that includes several tasks that each municipality has to carry out, and I'll mention a few. For example, develop a budget with gender perspective, to have an office that joins and leads the gender transversalization process in the municipality. What are the minimum programs, for example, strengthening of capacity in local development and also economic development, to strengthen the broadening of women, female powers. That's very important in all fields. So this is the main task that I, as a president of the association, have proposed, to generate these capacities and strengths, and to strengthen these capacities in the municipalities to transversalize gender focus. And finally, I would like to tell you in 2 seconds what the experience has been in Peñalolén in this field, because the lesson of local management has enabled us to reproduce many of the capacities and the initiatives in other municipalities. And in that sense, in Peñalolén, we have developed a policy where I think we're already in a second stage, where we have developed a gender focus at local level. And of course, this year we have institutionalized the Executive Gender Equality Secretary with Viviana Vicenzo, who's here in this panel. Right here, and she has a task in a position at the board of directors to transversalize gender focus in all municipal instances where we have to work to develop a plan in this matter. And we've also developed certain policies and programs at local level that can improve and promote protection and also working with women. For example, the program Solo para Ti, which is a program linked to health for prevention of diseases
cervicuterino con horarios
especially
especiales para atender mujeres. Segundo, el
cervical,
SOS
uteral,
Mujer,
and
un
breast
programa de
cancer.
seguridad
Another program for
pionero
safety
en
for
Chile para
women, which is a
proteger
pioneer
mujeres
in
víctimas
Chile
de
to
violencia
protect
intrafamiliar.
women
Y una tercera área
of
bien
family
importante, que es el
violence,
área de
and another area which is
fortalecimiento
very
en el
important
ámbito
to
económico para que
strengthen
las mujeres puedan
women
lograr
in the economic
independencia
field so they
económica
can
para
have
poder
economic
desarrollarse y sobre todo
independency so
vinculado
they can
también a
develop
violencia,
themselves, and
porque
also
violencia,
linked to
muchas de las
violence
mujeres que
because
no logran
many women
tomar la
who
iniciativa de
cannot take the
abandono del
initiatives
hogar,
to
donde
leave
están
their
siendo víctimas de
homes where
violencia,
they
tiene que
are
ver con
victim
la
of violence,
imposibilidad de
and most of the
ser
time that
independientes
is
económicamente.
related to their
Y por
impossibility
último, que
to
quiero
be
decirlo
economically
porque
independent.
se
And
ha
finally,
nombrado también acá en varios
because here
momentos,
we've said up
es que
many
tenemos un
times that we
programa y una
have
iniciativa
a program
vinculada
and
al
an
tema de la
initiative linked
crianza.
to
Y fuimos el
bringing
primer
up,
municipio
to
en traer
upbringing,
un
and we're the
programa
first
que es el
municipality
programa Triple
in
P a
bringing
nivel
a program
internacional
which is
basado en
called Triple
evidencia para
P,
potenciar
based on
justamente
evidence,
lo que es el
to
apoyo a la
enhance
crianza en
support
la familia
to
y
upbringing
trabajar
in
la
family,
coparentalidad
and to
y
work with
el apoyo a la
co-parentality
crianza tanto
and
para
the support
madres y
for the
padres en nuestra
upbringing
comuna.
for
Y
women
yo creo que
and
esas
for
iniciativas, que las
mothers and
estoy
fathers in the
nombrando y solo
community.
como
And these
titular, han
initiatives, I'm
sido las que
mentioning
nos han
them
permitido ser pioneros en
because
muchas
they
materias
have
como municipio
enabled us to
en
be
el
pioneer in many
trabajo en temas
matters
de
as a
género y poder
municipality
compartir estas
in gender,
experiencias
and
con
to be able
muchos
to share the
municipios. Sé que
experience
feliz
with
de
many
poder hacerlo
municipalities, and we're very happy
con
to
las
do so.
alcaldesas durante
I'm
estos
we'll be
días para
happy
poder
to do this
apoyar
with
y
all the
trabajar
female
en las
mayors
iniciativas que
these
se
days, and to
desarrollan a
work on the
nivel local.
initiatives
Así
that
que
are being developed at
agradezco
local
mucho la
level. So
invitación.
I'm
Sé que
very
tenemos
thankful
muy poco
for
tiempo,
the
pero por supuesto feliz de
invitation.
poder
We
estar
have
acá
very little time, but I'm very happy
a
to
la
contribute here
transversalización del
to
enfoque de género en
transversalization
las
of gender
gestiones
focus
locales.
in
Muchas
local
gracias.
management. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Carolina Leitao for also to speak of these solutions that are very clear, but also to give them a sense of urgency. The organizers are a bit short on time because the members of the CAF board have to meet, and the mayor's meeting will start recently. So now I'll challenge you that the final mission shouldn't be 1 minute, but 30 seconds. And as you think of this, I think that the conversation should be closed by expressing that we need global, regional, and local solutions. To have a sense of urgency, we have to pick up pace in public policies, but also in economic policies and in environmental policies. Today we wanted to have a panel to create awareness of women leaders in different areas of development, but there'll be also meetings with young women and the presentation of the diversity strategy of CAF during these 2 days. And here we are talking of changes in policies, in our economy, in society, a change in each one of us. We are called to remove our biases because nobody has walked in this path, on this path of equality. So the final message for the people that are following us, for the people that are here in the plenary, and we'll have the same round that we start with. We'll start with you, Renata. I think that for my 30 seconds, I think it's important to be clear that the gender agenda and all these issues are not obvious. We have to train ourselves, our perspective, to see problems. Even as women, we know more of what we go through, but we need to train our perspective to have responsibility and to pay attention to it. And I also like to say that the importance of having men in the room. I remember the gender panels years ago. There were no men. It was just women talking to women. And we all know our issues. So thank you to CAF and ECLAC for opening this space. It is very important, and we need to train our perspective. Claudia Sangüesa? I think that we are in times of great global challenges, first in terms of economy in our societies and the environment, and it's the responsibility of all institutions to open these spaces so that they are inclusive, to create different public policies, and also a call to all women that occupy roles of leadership to not forget that and to have strength to be able to talk of these issues and to push forward these agendas at all levels. Luz Vidal, please. Yes, I'll start with a phrase that I like, and that is, nobody should be left behind, and referring to that mayors will be working from their territories and how important it is to work from there to drive public policies that can reach at a more macro level and even international. How can we make women participation in leadership roles, to have horizontal relationships free of stereotypes and without prejudice? All women have the same capacities as men to lead, and today we need to be able to be in these spaces, to be able to have representation from our territories so we can have more dignified and fair public policies. Michel Mulchev. Thank you, Adana. I would refer to the double backpack that Maria said, and that is beyond public policies, to make a call to have awareness of how our transit in public life are opportunities to transform spaces that were not designed for women, to transform institutions, to transform power structures, but to transform them being women. Sometimes when we enter these spaces, we feel that we have to behave to be able to fit in this space. And the true call is to be women, to be sensitive, to be intuitive, to be brave, as you were in your initial speech, to talk of what is normally not talked about, because that perspective that we bring to the table, and it's that perspective that will allow to transform spaces so that other women can access these roles of leadership. Carolina Leitel, please. Well, thank you. I think that I wanted to make a call to an initiative that we will drive from the Association of Municipalities. We want to work this year to we are working towards providing a certification for all mayorships, a certification for gender equality, and we invite all mayors to get involved, because not anything that we're talking about can be achieved without a commitment of the leader. It is important to have the commitment of our leaders to develop policies, to finance them, and to push them forward locally. That is our invitation and our call for everyone to participate in this certification. Thank you, and we hope that this week is historic and that is a watershed moment for the region and that nobody takes a spectator role towards this demand to have the future that we dream of equality, sustainability, and that, as our General Secretary said, we must be built together. An applause for our panelists. For you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. We invite our panelists to please remain seated while we invite the closing remarks from Maria Jose Torres, the recent coordinator of the System for the United Nations in Chile.
Buenos días.
Good morning to everyone, and what a huge panel. Thank you very much for each one of your comments and contributions that you make. I'll go right to the chase. And Anna expressed this very clearly. The call from this panel has been, as the President Bachelet said, is to break the glass ceiling. And I was thinking that if by 2030 we should have reached gender parity according to the SDGs, we need to have parity in political exercise or have the same level of influence in technology. And we are making a call to create awareness on what is occurring right now. And I'd like to connect this with another issue that has to do with to access gender equality cannot be that humanity has just placed people on Mars and we are not able to ensure something that has been agreed upon in 1945 when the Human Rights Declaration was written. And there's something that we are missing and we're not being able to work on collectively. And I'd like to refer to another thing that was said very clearly by our panelists, and that is the issue of interconnectivity. These are political actions. There's affirmative action, and there's evidence in different sectors. And there's been assistance, I'd say, in all our panelists and their speeches to create awareness, as if we don't believe that gender equality benefits not only women, but also benefits communities and families. It benefits countries' development. Although all studies, and this is clearly documented, and we have different studies from CAF and ICLAC. My last point, just to express that the pandemic acknowledged that to face this as a humanity, women suffer setbacks in the economic progress, according to data from ICLAC. And upon this scenario, not only we need to be concerned, but we have to take the opportunities. This year, the General Assembly talked of communities and our future. And I connect that from the call made from Chile, from the two undersecretaries and Mrs. Mayor, that maybe this first level of action that has to do with communities, with mayorships and communities, something that we have to prioritize. I've just returned from the country team, from the wildfire areas in Chile. And something that I'll say, the most affected people by wildfires are rural women and home leaders that have lower income in those areas. That is clear and evident, but it reflects this incredible gap that we are referring to. In 2024, the General Assembly will talk of the General Secretary has invited member states to talk of the Assembly of the Future, and here it would be important, and we are in Chile in this event, that countries should be measured and should be asked to imagine the future, and we must be creative and bold to imagine this future, because as President Bachelet mentioned, in the common agenda, there isn't any possible future without gender equality. And I conclude with the country team Chile, the team that is working with all our institutions, and I acknowledge the presence of my colleagues from UNESCO, from the UNDP, because we were able to achieve something important. We're able, by adding all the efforts of the Women's Conference on America, who has the best achievements, and talked of the Society of Care, we're able that all the work that has been done at the Gender Conference in New York, to have for the first time in the region a cooperation framework that we are going to sign with Chile that has a pillar in gender equality. In addition, traversing all the programs and policies and specific programs to work on those most underserved groups. And from that point of view, we want to highlight the importance of maintaining the debate and keeping it open, and highlighting that when countries such as Chile are defined as feminist, there's a double responsibility. There's a national responsibility that you have very well expressed, our 3 Chilean panelists. But there's also this responsibility that in the case of Chile is very clear in their feminist foreign policy in trade, but also using it multilaterally. Because if not, how are we going to work on situations in the world such as women are suffering in war situations or in Afghanistan and Pakistan? Those are very important in the sense that if it affects them, it also affects us. Thank you very much for your time. We continue with the closing remarks from Alejandra Creel, General Secretary of CAF. Well, I'll apologize because I will be very brief because many people up here have to move on to other meetings. But for me, it was very important as CAF to mention how this conference was created. First, because many times among us that we are in roles of leadership, we don't even look at each other. Many times among us, when we travel together, or we visit countries, and we visit different places, we do not ask hearings among each other, among us, or to recognize that another person is also in a leadership role. These moments give us a space to recognize each other, but also because we wanted to visibilize them, to visibilize a Michelle Bachelet that inspires us so that each one of us can lead a country, to visibilize you because today you are part and are leaders in your governments, but also at international organizations. But this ceremony, this commemoration to the International Women's Day cannot conclude without remembering all those voices of all those women that today are not with us today. Those women that today, I had a video from mining women of Bolivia, which is a very vulnerable sector, very marginal area, and that still are waiting for us, that despite that everything that has been spoken of today, to be able to realize that that is not enough. So our invitation is to work together and to commemorate Women's Day, recognizing each other and mentioning us between each other. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. We'd like to thank those who have accompanied us here in the room and those online on www.caf.com. With this, we conclude our conference. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you very much to all those who accompanied us today during this morning, and we invite you to accompany us during the other events that we have scheduled in Chile during this week.